Join us for Book Beat, Sundays at 5 p.m., Mondays at 1 a.m. and 9 a.m. on channel 859 CCX Create. Our guest is Rob Chapman, author of New Barbarians.
Sharing your passion starts with taking that first step. Take Will, for example. His first step was taking free TV classes at CCX Create. He's learning production skills and now has access to cutting-edge equipment. He's working on local music productions, meeting new people, and gaining the experience needed to produce his own show. Best of all, he's sharing his passion for music with others in the community. Share your passion. Visit ccxmedia.org.
Ladies and gentlemen, the New Barbarians.
Hello and welcome to Book Beat, the show about all things literary. Our guest today is Rob Chapman, author of New Barbarians, Outlaws, Gunslingers, Guitars. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You have a most interesting book, and rather than me ask a whole lot of questions, I'd like you to tell us how you came about getting this book put together.
Yeah, okay, well, the New Barbarians were, the story kind of starts where in 1977, the Stones were going to come into Toronto, Canada, they needed a fourth side of a live album, which became called Love You Live. They needed to do, the other three sides of the record took place on the 75-76 tour. And Mick Jagger and Keith Richards decided, you know what, we need a fourth side, which is more like a club, to take us back when we were, younger, and we used to play the clubs in London. So they decided they were gonna go to this small club in Toronto called the El Mocambo Club. They didn't wanna be in New York with all the distractions. They didn't wanna be in LA, so they decided, why don't we go to Toronto? So they were all to meet in Toronto and record the fourth side of this little club. So everybody else got there, and Keith was always at that point. At the time, Keith was horribly addicted to heroin. So was his partner in crime. Her name was Anita Pallenberg. It was his common law wife. But they were hopelessly, addicted to drugs. And so Keith was always late. So the Stones would always get somewhere, and he would show up a week later. So he came into Canada to, join the band, and on his way in, him and his Anita, his common law wife, they got arrested coming into Canada with a lot of heroin and a lot of cocaine. And so he got arrested, which became the story, as opposed to they tried to get away from the distractions. It became the story. Keith Richards gets busted, and they try to keep it quiet, but it got out quickly. He gets busted coming into Toronto with enough drugs for trafficking. This is no longer he's just got some on him that he's,
using.
He's using. Now this is like, he's got enough to put him away for a long time. So he comes in, they do the show, he gets out on bail, they go ahead with the show, which is very chaotic, and there's a lot of stuff in there about the book, but they do the show beautifully. They get out of Toronto. And, Keith's got to wait trial now on all this. He had an ounce, which is 28 grams of heroin, which is, trafficking. He's got cocaine, he's like, so he has to wait trial. And obviously the Stones have big attorneys. So they're able to postpone it. So all of a sudden, this is early 1977. So the Stones, business as usual, they always work a lot. They go to Paris to record what became Some Girls, which that came out in 1978. So they go do the tracks in Paris, and some of the songs that people would know would be Miss You, Beast of Burden, Shattered. So they go cut this record in Paris. Into 78, they finish it up, and they do what the Stones do, which is plan a tour of the States, the USA. So summer of 78, with the trial still hanging over Keith's head about, this guy could go away. This could be the end of the Stones. This could be not the Stones as we know it. Is it possible to go on without Keith? You know, so this is a big story everywhere they went. They do, you know, they played St. Paul Civic Centers where they played here. The record sold 6 million copies. So on the surface, to the fan, everybody's like, they're hot, they're back, you know, this is great. It's getting album of the year. All the critics are loving it, but that's really not the mood in the Stones' inner circle. The mood is Keith going away because the trial is getting put off. Finally, right in the middle of the summer of '78, they set a trial date for October of '78.
Mm-hmm. And so, did the trial go forward? What happened?
So the trial does happen. They put it off for 20 months because he got busted in early '77. They finally go October of '78. The whole defense of Keith was he's a CEO of one of the largest music companies in the world, the Rolling Stones. This is what he makes every year. He clearly has a horrible drug problem, but he doesn't need to sell drugs to make money. He's got more money than he needs. He has a horrible habit. So please do what's right, which is put him in a rehab facility, clean him up, but to go lock him up, it just doesn't make any sense. That worked. He got off. And what the judge ordered him to do was he had to do Rolling Stones had to do 2 shows in Toronto, and the judge got to pick the charity of choice, and he picked the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, which was kind of funny, you know, when they were saying the Stones are doing a, you know, benefit concert about the blind. They thought that was funny because, you know, Stones had the reputation back then of getting kind of lit up and out there anyway.
Yeah. Blind drunk.
You're right,
blind,
exactly.
Loaded,
Loaded.
Blind
and so
Stone.
it was almost like the running joke, like it's perfect. So fast forward, they got to do 2 shows in Toronto. The date is set for April of '79. So while this is going on, the Stones normally would have toured Europe in '79 to follow up the US tour of Some Girls. That's how they did it. 69, 70, 72, 73. They should have been in Europe in '79. They decided there's too much going on. We're not in shape to do it. Shape meaning we got too much going on. Mick's going through a divorce from his wife at the time, Bianca. So they decided we're not touring Europe in '79. So Ronnie Wood, guitar player in the Stones, has got all this free time. He cuts a solo album amongst all this chaos. You know, has a little moments, you know, goes and does his own album, which became Gimme Some Neck. And he decides, the Stones aren't touring this summer. I'm going to use this time to promote my own album. Mm-hmm. So he goes out, and then he decides he has to get a band together. So this is his album, it's his thing. Most of the Stones played on the solo album. Now he's got to go out and play these songs live like any other band would do. So he starts looking for people. Well, the obvious choice was, with the Stones not touring, he's going to get his buddy, Keith.
Okay.
So he gets Keith Richards to play guitar. A lot of people raised their hand during this period. It should be known. Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin, Jeff Beck, Neil Young, Boz Scaggs. But I mean, Keith and Ronnie were, obviously it made sense, and Keith's like, if I do this, just me and you on guitar, we're not getting anybody else. Ronnie's like, of course. So then he's got to fill all the other positions. So he gets, the drummer he gets is a guy named Joseph Zigaboo Modaliste, who's a drummer from the funk band The Meters. Meters were an early incarnation of the Neville Brothers, which became the Neville Brothers, and most rock bands and most musicians love the Meters. So to get Zigaboo, even though they weren't commercially that popular, everybody knew who they were.
And they were looked up to.
Oh, absolutely. And the Meters also and the Stones knew the Meters, so the fact that they got Zigaboo, for them wasn't a big stretch. It was, if they couldn't get Charlie Watts, the Stones drummer, then this is the guy they wanted to get. They would get, and even Charlie said, get Zigaboo. So he gets Zigaboo on drums, then it comes time to getting a bass player. Ronnie's trying to get all these pairings to make it a funky band. So I'm gonna get the best jazz bass player. So he goes after Stanley Clarke. Stanley Clarke is, the story goes, he's sitting in Miami Beach on vacation. It's before cell phones. It's just you leave a message at the hotel desk and you hope you get a return call. And he calls Ronnie back, and so I'm putting this band together to, go out and, Stones aren't on the road this summer. I'm going to promote my own record. He goes, what are you doing? He goes, I've got some time. And he says, well, do you know any Chuck Berry songs? And Stanley's like, yeah, of course I know some Chuck Berry songs. He goes, you're hired. So Ronnie gets Stanley Clarke. He's got Zigaboo. He's got Keith. Then Ronnie used to be in a band before the Stones called the Faces. So he gets a keyboard player from the Faces, Ian McLagan, to do the keyboards, who actually done some work with the Stones, so that's a natural fit. And then the last piece, which became, of course, is they got on saxophone Bobby Keys, he's the sax on Brown Sugar by the Stones. He's been with the Stones for a long time. He's played with Buddy Holly, John Lennon, excuse me. So there's the New Barbarians. So you've got those 5 people, and there's the band for the New Barbarians. So April 22nd, 1979, which is, if you think about what I'm going to tell you, it's bizarre it even happened. You've got the New Barbarians are going to kick off this whole day of the 2 Stones shows. So you got all the Stones fly in, and obviously the judge wanted them to do 2 shows because, as Mick went on record to say, we had to do them. If it was about money, I just would have wrote a check. So it was about doing 2 shows. So the New Barbarians played first at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Stones came on right after them. Then there's a little break. Then the Barbarians come back out, open up for them again, and then the Stones go back on at 8:30. So you had 4 shows right in a row. Keith and Ronnie never really left the stage except for, the little intermission. So they did 4 shows, which is a lot, and it's also the last time the Stones had ever done 2 shows in one day.
Oh my goodness.
So, and they're, at that time, we look back on it, they're young bucks now, but then they were 35, and people were like, you're too old to do that. You're gonna, and they were only 35.
And now they're in their...
Most of them are in their set. I think Ronnie's the baby at 69. Yeah.
Oh, they're, yes, tender, sweet young things.
Tender, sweet young things. So I didn't say something about the New Barbarians. The New Barbarians name came about where Neil Young was really wanted to go out on the road with them, and he's from Canada, and he's around. A lot of people around around them at the time, and they knew everybody knew each other, very communal atmosphere. And he's around him, and he's like, they're sitting somewhere, and he goes, "You guys are nothing but a bunch of barbarians." And Ronnie goes, "I like that." And they found out there was a band called the Barbarians at the time, a garage punk band, so they couldn't use the name, so they just changed it to New Barbarians. So that's where the name came from, which I had to throw in there. So now you've got, the Stones do the 2 shows. Keith goes to court the next day, which would be April 23rd, checks in, and he's done his thing, he's went to court, he's done his obligation to the law. And so now the Barbarians, why this is all going on in the spring and the winter, they set up for Ronnie's, promotion of the album, 16 dates across the U.S. So they go out as the New Barbarians in the summer of '79 to really, at this point, the key thing's out of the way. He didn't go to jail. Now it's just to go promote Ronnie's record, Give Me Some Neck.
And that refers to the guitars,
The guitar, yeah. And the picture on the cover of Give Me Some Neck, which is in the book, it's an old drawing that he did, and it's his face with the rooster haircut, and then he's, the guitar neck is under his chin, and he's holding it. So he's a talented artist, so the album cover is really cool in itself.
On to the tour of the New Barbarians. Did anything exciting happen
It's interesting
in that?
Well, so they go out with so there's a lot of anticipation about this for the fact that obviously the players, there's 2 Stones in the band, and they just came off that Some Girls tour, so they were at the height of their powers. They were as big, the kids loved them, grown-ups were growing up with them, they were a big band. So when they went off on these tours, Ronnie's manager at the time was a guy named Jason Cooper, who was an ex-footballer, what they call in London. He was in the soccer world. So his thing is just blow everything up, grandiose. It's the more, obviously promoter's job is to put butts in the seats, but he's just like, he's not in the rock and roll world, he's just a big promoter. So as this tour starts, he was a little leery, not the musicians so much, he was a little leery that these venues that they're booking, they're not going to be, they're basketball arenas. They're 18,000 seat arenas across the country. And he's worried that they're not going to fill them up just on the name, the New Barbarians, which, if you think about it now, you got Keith Richards and Ron Wood, as huge as it gets. You got Stanley Clay. The talent's there. But he's still leery that he's not going to be able to fill it. They're not going to be able to fill up these basketball arenas because of one important thing is missing, and that's Mick Jagger. So what ends up starting to happen is all the tour posters that are coming out says They use the two names, Keith Richards and Ron Wood, obviously, is the most cachet. And then they go, and friends. And then they list Stanley Clark. And they don't even spell Stanley Clark wrong on the tour poster. It's in the book. They don't even spell Bobby Key's name right. I mean, they just almost like in those guys, because, you know, there was talk that underground that all these guests were going to show up. Names like Rod Stewart, Van Morrison, Mick Jagger. Why wouldn't Mick Jagger show up? They just did a bunch of shows the summer before.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't he fly to Chicago and just sing 2 songs? And that isn't that far from the, you know, the realm of happening. So now you got a bunch of concert goers going to these shows, you know, seeing this, you know, really this great straight ahead, you know, they played covers like Chuck Berry covers, they played old country songs, Ronnie had some of his own songs, but it's just straight ahead rock and roll. But of course the yells from a lot of the spots in the arena are, where's Mick? Where's Dylan? Where's Rod? You know, who's gonna show up tonight? And Keith and Ronnie, who traded off lead vocals on the tour, are looking at everybody going, you know, what are you talking about? You know, this is the band you're gonna. They were kind of confused for a while, like, why are they saying Mick's gonna be here and all that? They didn't get it. When behind the scenes, they're like building this up. So what ended up happening is people are starting to think they're getting ripped off.
So did that affect the promotion of the further part of the tour?
It started building when everybody started. What ended up happening is it came to a head about halfway through the tour. Excuse me. They went to Milwaukee, and Milwaukee, it was building so much that, you know, that more than any other city there was such talk of people that were in town that were going to get up on stage, and the concert ended. Nobody showed up. I mean, it was just the Barbarians, and it was like. The stage designer, a guy named Ken Graham, said it was like the villagers in a Frankenstein movie. I mean, take away the pitchforks and the, you know, it's like they wanted the monster. Chairs, you know, these were back then, they had foldable chairs and a lot of the, I mean, they were flying through the air. They were tipping over stuff. They were, you know, it was a male-dominated audience. They had a lot to drink, the testosterone's flowing, you know, it's like they were mad, and they were mad for a false, you know, reason. There was no guarantee that any of these guys were going to show. So Milwaukee, the place was destroyed. I mean, as much as you can destroy an arena, things were wrecked. Little fires were set.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it got out of hand. And after the concert, you know, these guys are, you know, it was crazy. And they finally found out that Jason Cooper, the guy I referred to as Ronnie's manager, was starting to leak things to the promoters, because there were some, you know, they all had to face the law with all this, like, where did this come from? And finally they realized that Jason admitted that he was starting to, you know, fabricate things a little bit.
Oh,
and
so that makes, he was doing a little bait and switch.
Yes, exactly. And, you know, he was, you know, and who knows what he never had to stand trial for any of this, but, you know, who knows how much he was really saying, because his whole, in conniving ways, was, I just need to fill these arenas. I don't care how we get people in there. Whereas Ronnie and Keith are, as crazy and as, you know, debauched ridden as they are, they're professionals, and they did not like that you were kind of conniving the public. Or that's a whole different thing, that you're lying. They would rather play to 10 people than to go and a bunch of lies.
Yeah, the
integrity of it was ruined.
Yeah, because they had their own moral code.
They did. I think they
had their own moral code. It might not be what the average Joe on the street has, but that average Joe was going to, what's the word I want? Respect them more if they did what they said they were going to do.
Yeah.
Play the arena, honor the guests that were there.
Yes. And see, you also got to remember, and this is all talking to I talked to, like, you know, guitar techs, the road manager, all these guys that were involved on the tour. The tour had a twofold vibe to it. One fold was, it was a good time. Nobody will dispute it. It was a lot of fun. It was the late 70s. And Keith especially was celebrating because he knew he wasn't going to jail. So there was this weight lifted off him. But then on the other side of it is, he does not want to fall on his face, because he's never done anything away from the Stones. Keith was in the Stones when he was 18 years old, and that's the only job he's ever had. So now Mick's not around. It's, what's the saying, when the cat's away, the mice will play. So
yes.
those guys are having a ball, even though they're all seasoned, successful musicians, but Mick's not there. It's not the circus of the Stones where it's like every town is like they gotta, it's a circus. So Keith is very aware of, I do not want to embarrass myself, because he knows Mick is watching every move. So there's also, there's this fine line between letting himself go every night and just like going for it, but then also his showbiz acumen and his professionalism has to come into play. Like, we got a show to do every night, He doesn't have to do that with the Stones.
And not mess around.
Not mess around and deliver what these people paid which back then was astronomical, $12.50 for.
Yes, yes.
So that's what, the whole thing with these shows, when you say the shows were great. Anybody that, that I talked to that in other cities, they loved them for they were what you thought they were going to be, just a straight ahead rock and roll show, nothing fancy, no bells and whistles. But then
no pyrotechnics,
no blow up things. It was just stripped down.
No
that's
breaking
what you got.
guitars.
And just like I said, somebody I was talking to, they said, how moronic is that for the people back then to feel like they got ripped off? It's like as if Keith Richards and Ron Wood weren't cool enough. It's like, what do you want? These guys were the walking epitome of rock and roll at the time.
Mm-hmm. The idea that, going back to this Jason Cooper.
Yes.
The idea that he would dishonor those players, the other players too,
sure,
is just reprehensible.
It is. It's kind of underhanded. You can think of all these words, and like I said, that's not what these guys were. Like you said, they did have a moral compass. They were very. Anybody that met any of those guys say, they were really good guys, and they were also. Most of the people in the band, not most, all of them had achieved success at that point. They're not just starting off, so they also have a level of professionalism and a level of success that they don't want to get destroyed over something dishonest like this. It was in their control not to have that happen. And excuse me, the back to the Milwaukee story, which it's what's really funny about it is, or not funny, and the book will say, depending on who you talk to, when they found out that Jason Cooper was involved with shenanigans like that of stretching the truth, Keith was known to carry a pistol with him and also a ratchet knife, which the Rastafarians use. Depending on who you talk to, they sent for a helicopter in Wisconsin for Jason Cooper, and Keith either chased him to the helicopter with a gun or a knife and said,
my goodness.
I never want to see you again. Kicked him off the tour mid-tour.
Oh my goodness, that's really something.
Yeah, so that's the kind of guy Keith was, but it was his way of saying, that was deplorable. Get out of here.
Oh yes. Yes, we don't want any part of that.
No, we'll stand on our own merits. If they don't show, that's our problem.
Yeah. With this, it was 1979, is that right?
79.
Okay, so they're touring. How did you get the access to get all this material? The book is chock full of everything you can imagine. Pictures of tickets, drawings, photographs, stories of various things. How did you manage to get these guys to cooperate with you?
It's a good question, and being a Stones fan, as I said before this, as arguably my favorite band, to get up in the morning and say you're going to write a book about the Stones is a great dream, but I don't know where the movie it's from, but it's the dream of a boy. It would be hard to do for the fact that you'd have to get access to everybody. You'd have to get Jagger to open up, which he never will, and it's just really not there's a lot of Stones books out there, but three-fourths of them are junk. So how I started writing this book was I was working for a publishing company, and leading up to this, I spent a lot of years in the music business. I got to be, it sounds corny to say this, but it's the truth, I'm friends with Ronnie and Keith, and I met them, you know, a long time ago and have stayed friends with them. I was emailing Ronnie, he's living in London at the time, something completely different, and I said, why didn't anybody ever write a book about the Barbarians, or maybe a tour program with some facts? And I said it was such an important, if not cool, period of the, you know, of everybody involved. And he's like, yeah, you know, and he's like, a couple comments, and then he said, you know, the next day, he's 6 hours ahead of me. I think we all went to bed and woke up the next day, and his manager's on copy saying, Ronnie said you might have some ideas, and then he's like, yeah, you should do it. You know, and
how fun.
Yeah, so I mean, he's like, you should do it, thinking like he has no aspirations to do it, but he's really proud of that period. And so I said to myself, well, you know, I'm working at a publishing company. If anybody's got a shot at getting it published, I'm right there. Mm-hmm. So then I called a couple people that I knew on the Stones, what they call the inner circle, and I said, you know, Ronnie knows that I'm going to do this, but I got to do this right. Where do I start? And then one guy would say, well, Henry was the photographer. We'll get, you know, I can get you Henry's number. And then it was, well, Richard Fernandez was Tom Petty's manager now. I think he was the tour manager. You know, I'd write that down. And then I would, as soon as I'd email, one thing about all these guys, for as big as these guys were, you know, 2 years ago and this period, all sweet guys, girls, people. Everybody I dealt with, there was not one jerk in the bunch.
Oh, that's fabulous.
And that was really cool. And the admiration and respect they had for each other was, you know, you'd mention a name. Oh, how's he doing? Give him a hug for me. There was not 1 ounce of, I don't like that guy anymore. Or, you know, so that made it really easy that it was a really, you know, special time. And they would give up these names. Oh, did you talk to Ken Graham? He designed the stage. I think I got it here somewhere. I'll email you back. Yeah, he's still in LA. And all of a sudden it just, so back to where did I get all this? It just took on a life of its own where, oh, Ernie was the guy that supplied him with all the guitars when they were doing rehearsals. I got Ernie's number. He lives in New York now. And and then Ernie would go, oh, the Barbarians, you're kidding me. And then, you know, they would go, I got some photos and I got a filing cabinet, and you could hear the filing cabinet open by some of these older guys. Like, here it is, I got 2 with Belushi. And, you know, so I picked a subject that was on the fringes of the Stones world, but everybody was so fond of that, you know, it just started snowballing. And then I realized I wasn't going to compromise. When I want to know who Ronnie's guitar tech was, and if he's alive, I want to talk to him. I wasn't going to settle for his girlfriend or something. I wanted to go right to the source, and I got lucky, I guess, because I was able to speak to everybody that was pretty much involved in the tour.
Did you travel to any of the places, or was this purely telephone and email and things like that?
A lot of that, the latter, but I did go to LA to talk to a couple of the photographers, and again, Ronnie is a sweet guy, and Ronnie, you know, as you know, or to inform our people out there, is that when you're a photographer, if you shoot 58 photos of, you know, Mick Jagger on tour, those are your photographs. You have the rights to them. So all the photographers I got were, you know, they own the rights to these pictures. I mean, Ronnie and Keith don't have these they don't have all these negatives. They're not photographers. They have people shot Barbarians. So you know, it was just, you know, getting to these people wasn't that hard. I didn't have to go through the Stones bureaucracy. So back to, did I have to travel anywhere? The Stones happened to be on the road in 2015. So I used to go to Stone shows, and Ronnie and Keith would give me backstage passes, but I told Ronnie, for instance, in Milwaukee, that I wanted to come to the show because I had all these photos I wanted him to look at and see what he thought of them. So I printed out, Xeroxed some copies, put them in a folder, and put some on my phone. And I met him in Milwaukee, and we sat there for an hour poring over photos, and he's like,
oh, fun.
Yeah, and he was like, that's, you know, and he's like, and he would think about it, and he'd go, wow, and then so.
And he'd tell you a story.
Or he'd tell me a story, I'd go, what about this one? He'd go, I have no idea. You know, then he would remember some of them, which was also funny because it was, 30 some years ago at that point. But so, and then so there was a little bit of me flying to talk to Ronnie a little bit. I would send, the other people some things through, packages to show them stuff. They would send me stuff. But 3/4 of it was, in this day and age, I talked to Stanley Clark for probably 2 different times for 4 hours, total, because, his manager just gave me his, trusted me felt like, I can trust this guy, and if Ronnie knows about it. And I would send a couple emails of Ronnie and I having some dialogue, so these people didn't think I was just some crazy stalker. So I would forward them an email, and I'd say, here's a picture with me and Ronnie. Here's some email exchanges with Ronnie, so and they go,
An
okay.
introduction, in
Just
other
so they
words.
knew I was. I mean, how many people could, there's a lot of cuckoo people out there that just, I'm doing a book about Mick Jagger, I'm doing a book about, Bob Dylan, and then none of it's true. But they're trying to get access to these celebrities where I knew if these guys were going to open up to me, they would have to know that I was legit and I wasn't some shyster. So once that was
Again, that
established-
moral code.
Yeah,
That-
exactly. And they also, Stanley was, and all of them were kind of like, there'd be a pause. What kind of book you doing? And I'm like, I'm not doing a tabloid. I don't need a stripper and guys, sitting at a bar passed out. I'm not. It's not. I want some funny stories, but I'm not here to what's the word?
Do an expose.
Yeah. It's not really my thing. This isn't a National Enquirer thing. It's a story of an important period in the Stones' history, and I'm getting all the info from the guys. So, getting it all was, once it started snowballing, it just kind of, and then I, had notebooks full of numbers and emails that, I was able to get all the info that I needed.
Oh, that's terrific. I was wondering what happened to the New Barbarians after 1979. Did they continue? What can you tell me about? You said you had talked to Stanley Clark
Yep.
and some of the other people. Did they just all go their separate ways?
Yeah, that's another good question. So they did the 16 U.S. shows. The last show of the tour was in San Diego. Keith had, there was a resort kind of like, I forget the name, I think it's called One Palm, but it's actually a resort in Palm Springs where Al Capone used to vacation.
Oh my
And
goodness.
of course Keith was like, loved that. Oh, is this where Capone stayed? Let's go. So they basically, for the first couple week of June, they brought their wives and their kids, and they just barbecued and sat out in the back, listened to music, and kind of, decompressed from their Barbarians tour. And then, so now we're into June, and then, Ronnie and Keith went to the Bahamas because the Stones were back. Now they're back to work with the Stones because the Stones are going to cut an album that became Emotional Rescue, which came out in the spring of 1980. So they go back to work on their real jobs. Stanley Clark and all the other, do what they do, which is go play, music in their capacity of whatever they do. So they all go their separate ways, like you said, left no bad feelings, all had a great time. And they get a call in the middle of the summer where they want the Barbarians to do Nebworth, which was the big festival in London, and they want them to be the co-headliner with Led Zeppelin. And so they go, sure. So they get everybody on that. Everybody was able to go except Stanley. And I asked Stanley, he goes, I would have went in a second. He said, but I just had prior commitments for Stanley Clark. I was on the road to promote an album, or I would have been there in a second. So they did Nebworth, there's another funny story about Nebworth, but they did Nebworth. They ended up getting a guy named Phil Shen. Phil played bass with the Faces and Rod Stewart and fit right in. So he did
perfect.
he filled in the one show at Nebworth it would have been August of '79. And the interesting thing about that show, again, another one of these stories about why the Barbarians had so much history in it, is that was for Led Zeppelin fans, that was Led Zeppelin's last show with John Bonham, who was the drummer who had died 6 months later from an overdose. So
Oh dear.
the show had significance for Led Zeppelin fans. So that was the last show the Barbarians did as that unit. That was it. And they didn't break up for any other reason except that was always just really a side project to promote Ronnie's solo album, and then it was time to become the Stones again.
Talk about the album. Talk about how that came about, and talk about the CD that's
Inside.
with the book.
Yeah. Well, the Barbarians never put out, they were never signed to Ronnie was signed to CBS Records, as Ronnie would, but the New Barbarians were just a band in name. I mean, it could have easily just been Ronnie Wood, instead of the Barbarians showing up in all these cities, it just would have been Ron Wood, and that would have been the concert. But they happen to call themselves something, which was unusual, but it made sense. So the music, they never had a record deal, which they weren't assigned to a label. And Bobby Keys pointed that out to me in a Southern accent once. He goes, "Son," he goes, we were the only band that sold out the Forum and the Garden, didn't have a record on the street. They sold out these big arenas, but didn't have a album in the stores. So the music from this, I thought, and I got some validation from a good friend of mine. I said, we should put out music with this, because then it becomes this whole story. What the Barbarians sound like, because there wasn't an album out there. But like in any band that has any kind of infamy or that is famous, there's bootlegs out there. So there were Barbarians bootlegs out there. As a matter of fact, Ronnie endorsed one from Maryland. And if you were a big Stones fan, you had 5 or 6 copies of different shows. Some were bad, some were okay. But I was able to get from it's funny, she's a Stones fan, but she right now is a professor in Poland. She had a board mix of the Madison Square Garden show, which, just to point out, that shot is from Madison Square Garden.
Okay.
So then I'm thinking, and that's the cover of the book, because I wanted that to be the cover early on. So I'd already chose the cover, and I showed that to Ronnie and Keith, and they're like, both said pretty much the same thing. Yep, that's the one, or that's it. They love the cover. So now I'm thinking, this is perfect. I've got music from Madison Square Garden. The cover's Madison Square Garden. It all ties together. So I got the tapes. A friend of mine's a pretty well-known producer and engineer in New York. I sent him the tapes. I said, can we make these? They're good, but can we make them better and really good? And he said, absolutely. We can punch this up. Producer talk, punch the guitars up, take the hiss out. So I said, let's do it then. So he made the bootleg from Madison Square Garden sound really good. The thing I was really careful about, if I would have started it from start to finish, the Barbarians on any given night their repertoire was covers, Ronnie Wood songs, and then the oddball Stone songs. Not so oddball as far as recognition. I mean, they did Honky Tonk Woman, they did Jumpin' Jack Flash. But if I put those Stone songs on the music, then it's a whole nother can of worms, because all Stone songs were written by Jagger Richards. I would have had to gone through mix legal people, and it would have been a whole nother thing, if I was even able to put the music out. So I pulled the Stones songs off there, put 10 songs on the CD that's in the book, 5 of them covers, 5 of them Ronnie Wood songs. Ronnie was fine with it. And a lot of people that have reviewed this, and friends of mine that have said it, that said, it's perfect, because you got the music that it's a whole package. You got the music, what they sounded like, to tie in with what I'm reading about. It's like a whole thing. And so I always wanted to do the music, and then I had enough people say, you got to do it. It just kind of completes the whole package.
Right.
So that's why I did it.
Well, it's a really, as you say, complete package, that you've got the pictures, you've got the memorabilia, you've got the stories, you've got drawings, you've got everything. And to have that music to flesh out, as we've talked about before, to flesh out the stories really makes it incredible. Yeah, and I kind of touched on, but you were saying, the people that came, the book predominantly has 4 or 5 photographers that I got pictures from that own the rights to them, and 80% of those pictures that I got from the 4 or 5 photographers are unreleased. So I know Stones fans are going, I never seen that. I mean, that was the joy for me, to know that they're going to look at these pictures and never have seen them before. The other thing that came forward, which was one of those, where did you get all this stuff, is there's a couple Stone sites that are fan sites. And when I told everybody I was writing this book, it's going to be published, I got the deal, it's not a dream, here's what I'm looking for. So I would send out emails to all these rabid fans saying, I need ticket stubs, high res. I mean, a lot of people have ticket stubs, but I need them in high res format. And I would have people go, I got Milwaukee, or I've got Atlanta, but I had this one guy in Portland, Oregon, who had every ticket. Oh my goodness.
And if you open the book, that you see them all, and he said, I've got them all high res. Well, then in the back of my mind, I'm like, what's he going to want? You know, because everybody's got a price.
Yes.
And he's, I'm like, I have a small budget on this, and I wasn't making that up. I had to pay the photographers, and certain people had to get paid, but the tickets, I didn't have a lot of money. I said, what are you looking for? His name's Kurt Angelides. I go, Kurt, what are you looking for? He goes, a couple copies of the book and credits in the book.
Oh, wow.
And I said, done.
Oh,
And
wow.
so he got them to me.
That's fabulous.
And so there were people like that just, they were blown away that they were mentioned in a book, let alone mentioned in a book about a band that they adored. You know, they sit around the kitchen table, I don't know if they do, but I would assume going, I'm in a Stones book.
Yeah, that's,
You know,
I'm in there.
I'm in there, and that's, you know, that is cool. And it's so, I had a lot of help from people that would produce just little things. You know, they did the concert for the blind in Toronto. The concert was for the blind. So there was 200 people in the crowd that were blind. So what they had to do was they made Braille programs. So the people at the Institute of the Blind thought that was, they were paying, I forget the word, they looked at that as condescending, or as, you know, they were placating them or whatever. So the Braille programs that the Stones gladly did never came out. I had a guy rear his head that had a copy of the Braille program, which I've never seen before, and that's in the book. So I got a copy of the Braille program from the blind show. They call it the Blind Date. Mm-hmm. And, you know, so I mean, I couldn't have been more happy that I actually was, I got the Braille program from Oshawa, and everybody's like, where'd you get that? Some guy had one.
Oh. It's a lot of serendipity.
Yes.
The fact that you were in the right place at the right time with the publishing job.
Yep.
And were able to say, I've got this idea. Pitch it to, you didn't even really pitch it to Ron Wood. It was.
No, I mean, he just said, you should do it. Kind of like, I mean, this guy's so successful and far beyond how does that stuff get done. He doesn't think that way. He's just thinking, if anybody could write it, you could write it.
Yeah, make it happen.
Yeah, I can't help you there, but you'd be good at it.
And so, you know, all of those things have gone together to bring out this work. And I'm just in awe because I've gone through the book many times and, you know, looked at the pictures, and as you say, there's pictures that nobody has ever seen before. And it's just, it's a real work of art.
Well, and that's, I mean, you know, everybody likes accolades. I mean, I know that when I saw it and I bought it on New Year's Eve or whenever, it was one of the days when it finally made it into a store. I mean, that was a big moment, obviously, to come out, get the shrink wrap off and go, it's done. Here's the finished goods. Mm-hmm. It was a huge deal. But what really, all I envisioned when I was writing this, Sue, is I knew a lot of those guys, and I certainly knew Ronnie and Keith. What I didn't want to envision happening is they're having a beer, or they're having a cappuccino at some point in the day, and they're looking through it, and they're like, this is crap. That was, I mean, of course I want to make money off it, but I mean, that would be my biggest nightmare. So the outpouring of these guys, the work of art thing, I've gotten from 3 people. One of the guitar techs used to work for Billy Preston, who's retired. These guys that were there are saying, it's more that there is a story there. That's the good thing. But the way it's classy, you know, the work of art and all that. So when you say that makes me feel really proud, because I know that that's all down the line, going down the line, that the other people from Ronnie to tour manager has to be saying that too, because I mean, I'm proud of it as far as how the graphics came out.
It's done well at every step. That's the thing that I noticed, is everything is really sharp.
Yeah, well, thank you. I turned in something that I heard horror stories about publishers, be it Simon & Schuster or, you know, Voyager Press, who did this, and I saw a lot of manuscripts when I was there of, you know, just words, pictures with Post-it notes, and just the fact that, you know, that's going to become a book. And then I heard, you know, God, he's got such horrible notes, or this is so messy, or geez, this is pretty much done, this is going to be easy, all kinds of stories. Mm-hmm. But then also I heard they took out my page 28, or, you know, they didn't even talk about my grandma. That's the most important part of the story, you know. Mm-hmm. And I heard that. So there was also a gut-wrenching period of, I know what I turned in,
is my baby going to come out
Well, yeah, and
alive?
It's the same thing if you're in a band. I saw it in the music business. No wonder artists that are sensitive hate record companies, because they turn in 12 songs. 4 of them are about their mom who died, and one's about a breakup with a girlfriend, and they leave 3 of them out, and the artist is like, I poured my heart out on those songs. And so that's why it's like art met commerce a long time ago, but I still think art and commerce don't get along very good.
I think you're exactly right.
So.
I think you're exactly right. We're getting toward the end of our time now. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Have we missed some stories? What else could you tell us to leave our viewers maybe one last good story?
Yeah, there's a story that isn't, certainly it's a good story, because I touched on it in Nebworth. So to give you an example, how this is 1979, computers aren't really the norm, and certainly, I guess right around 79 is when the Apple was first invented, I think. So I mean, this is a handshake era. This is when a period when you got to remember, if you know any history of the music business, until the late 80s, maybe early, the mafia is definitely infiltrated in the music business. That's an area where they can make money and where they can use it goes back to Sinatra stories. So when they're at Nebworth, the deal is the Barbarians are going to get paid $35,000 cash before they go on. It was a deal with the promoter, a guy named Freddie Bannister. So all the bands play. I think there's Todd Rundgren, there's a bunch of bands, and the Barbarians are next. The Barbarians had done their thing at the venue. They went back to their hotel, and the promoter's saying he's going to stiff them. He's not going to pay them. He's going to pay them after. And they're like, that's not the deal. And you got to remember, the Barbarians they kind of have a manager. They have a lawyer involved, but so enter a guy named Bruce Silberman, who's one of the photographers in the book, did a couple shows, his dad and him own parking lots and valet services in Los Angeles. He's a businessman who's in his 20s, who's going to take over his father's business, and is just kind of playing around photography before he just gets serious about his real job. So he's in at Nebworth, and they're not going to, the Stones and Ronnie and Keith are like, well, we're not going on then. We're not, until we get paid, we're not going on. And this guy's holding his ground. So Bruce is sitting there with him, this guy who's just friends with Ronnie. And Ronnie looks at him and says, you do this stuff. You're a briefcase guy. Go haggle with the guy. He goes, it's not, you got to go talk to him for us. And he goes, I'll do it. So the story's in the book. Some of it's in the book. He gets his grandfather's old World War II bag, and he goes down there with the guy and Freddie, and he meets him. He never really said how he got him. I mean, Bruce is not a huge guy. He's a tough, wiry Italian guy, but he's, nothing menacing about him. But so he was able to get $35,000 from Freddie, and what they wanted him to do first before they even went on was, they want to make sure that they get all the money. So Bruce takes a cab from the venue back to the hotel where all the Barbarians are sitting, goes down with the hotel manager, and he goes, I want to put this in your safe. And he goes, okay. And he goes, no, I want you to count it and put it in the safe and then sign something. So they take it a step farther where they want the manager of the hotel to count the $35,000.
So that there's another step in there.
That if something's missing, it's not on Bruce, Ronnie's buddy. And they, the hotel manager does it, puts the $35,000 in the bank. They get in their limos, they head to the show, and by this time, the shoes are flying and bottles are thrown. It's crazy, but they finally get up, and Ronnie said, we're ready. Sorry, there was a few glitches, and they do their show. And they go back to the hotel, and everybody's just kind of, it's the last show they're probably going to do as the Barbarians. They're having beers, they're toweling off, and what bands do. And Chooch is the guy's name, who is the guy that's, for lack of better terms, the kind of the whole manager of everything. Money, if a guitar string breaks, he's kind of the dad. And he's sitting on a table counting out money to all the players, and
100 here,
whatever, whoever
there.
got what cut, but he's paying everybody. And Bruce leans over and goes, and he's friends with Chooch too, and he said, where's my cut? Meaning that I just did like a big deal here. I got you your money. And he looks at him and he goes, are you on the contract? And he goes, well, no. And he goes, well, then you're not getting paid. If you're not on the contract, you're not getting paid. And he basically, that was his sobering way of saying, Chooch walked him to the elevator when they were going to go to dinner, and he said, look, you do parking lots. I do this stuff. She's a baker. Keith plays guitar. We do what we do. Do what you do. And that was a lesson that Bruce always says that. He's a parking lot and businessman. He's not a photographer. He's not in a band. He wanted to stay friends with the Stones and all that, but he didn't want to have to live in that world. And his name wasn't on the contract.
Okay.
He got nothing.
Yeah.
So he realized at that point that that was his cue to, he went back to LA, 1980, he got serious with his family business, and he's still to this day running his family business.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so
how interesting.
that was one story that he had. I mean, you know, the fact that he had to do all that work, which was a big deal, and then he just didn't get paid. But
Yeah.
that was
But you do what you do.
you do what you do.
Excellent. Thank you, Rob Chapman, for joining us today. And thank you, viewers, for joining us at BookBeat, the place for all things literary. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Ladies and gentlemen, the New Barbarians.
Hello, good evening.
Volunteering is more than just a word. It's a window to opportunities. Take Mark, for example. By taking free TV classes at CCX Create, Mark is helping bring entertainment and information to his community, along with building a foundation of skills that will take him one step closer to his dreams. Share your passion. Visit ccxmedia.org.